All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome on in to the Auburn Daily Show, episode 16 of the Auburn Daily Show. Lance Dawe here with you. Man, 16 episodes. Crazy that we've been able to get through this many this quickly. It just feels like I started the show just the other day. Thank you guys so much for stopping by on today's episode. Got a couple of interesting topics lined up here for you. 5 players that could break out for the Auburn Tigers this season. Going to talk about that on the football side of things. Going to talk a little bit about Colby Wooden. He was named a potential breakout player for the Tigers this season. And then also going to talk trap games for the Auburn Tigers this season. There are a few that could potentially trip the Tigers up. Going to see what happens this season with some of the lesser SEC competition that the Tigers faced. If you're not already, go ahead and follow us on our socials at @SI_Auburn on Twitter. You can also follow us on Facebook at Auburn Daily, live streaming every single day to Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube, on weekdays, starting at 4 p.m. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right. 5 potential players that could break out for the Auburn Tigers in 2022. Now, Zach Blackerby wrote this article over at auburndaily.com. So if you want to go check it out, you can go read it at auburndaily.com. But the first player here is somebody that I kind of hyped up heading into the spring game, and quite frankly, so did Zach, but we're going to continue to kind of gas him up, so to speak, as the offseason continues along. Malcolm Johnson Jr., a receiver for the Tigers. Talked about him a little bit before already on the show, just kind of asking the question, what will his role look like with the Tigers this upcoming season, right? Auburn's offense needs a receiver that can step up on the outside for them and can make some plays in the vertical passing game. We got to see, I believe he scored a touchdown against Alabama State last year on a what I believe was essentially a go route, if I'm not mistaken. And then he scored a touchdown, a deep touchdown, a throw from TJ Finley during this year's spring game. That was a drop, should not have counted, but they counted it anyway. But Auburn needs somebody that can step up on the outside a little bit. They've not had that Seth Williams guy in their offense since Williams has left. And so you got to have somebody step up. At 6'1", I don't know if Malcolm Johnson Jr. is necessarily equipped to take that next step, but he's got a lot of speed, and I think that he's shown the ability to high point the ball where he needs to. Like I mentioned, I thought his touchdown against Alabama State last year was nice. But like Zach notes, there are a ton of questions about the wide receiver on this room on this team. But Johnson is truly in a position to where he can earn a significant amount of playing time. Could potentially he's probably going to be a starter this season. And then on top of that, he could break out. I think that it's definitely he's definitely a candidate to potentially break out for the Auburn Tigers this season. All right, moving along. Number 2 here. This is somebody that we've also talked a little bit about before on the show. If you listen to our show, we had Trey Lee on right here at auburndaily.com just a few days ago to give his 5 bold predictions for the Auburn Tigers in 2022. And he predicts that Owen Pappoe will not just lead Auburn in tackles, but he also believes that Owen Pappoe will lead the SEC in tackles. And Zach Blackerby has Pappoe on his list of 5 Tigers that could potentially take a big step in 2022. And this is what Zach says in the article. He says, I know Pappoe isn't really a name that you may be used to seeing on these lists because he's already an elite defender. And Zach's right. He's got a lot of athleticism, very versatile. Can play closer to the line of scrimmage, really, really good in pass coverage as well. He's a smart player as well, which I definitely think is worth noting, especially at the linebacker spot. And Zach also notes in the article, last week I was listening to Jason Caldwell's appearance on The Drive, and he talked about how Papo has been taking on a coaching role with his teammates. Perhaps that added element of knowing the scheme and assignments from everyone on the field will be a little bit better. Will help Papo take his elite play to the next level. And I agree with Zach. Like I said, I think he's a very smart linebacker. I think he's very capable of being that number one guy and being a major contributor for the Tigers this season. So I think this prediction kind of goes hand in hand with what Trey Lee was saying just a few days ago in his bold predictions, which was that Papo's going to rack up some tackles this season. I know there's been some issues with his health, and I think that's a legitimate concern. I think it's fair to ask heading into this season, can Papo stay healthy? Because, you normally don't talk about injuries as a variable whenever predicting things for players. You don't say whenever you're giving your predictions for the SEC West, well, I think that Ole Miss is going to finish last because I think Jackson Dart's going to get injured week 2 against no-name school. You normally don't do that because it's something that you can't predict, right? You can't predict when somebody's going to get injured. But I think with Papo, you've gotten to see a track record there. You've gotten to see a little bit of history with his injuries. And so I just questioned whether or not he's going to be able to stay on the field this season consistently. But I will say, given his athleticism, given what Zach noted about him taking on a little bit of a coaching role with this year's team, I think that there's a legitimate expectation for Papo to perform this season. And then on top of that, I think that there's an underlying expectation, given the fact that he's a former 5-star recruit, for him to have some type of breakout season this year. Now, whether or not that does lead the SEC in tackles, whether or not that does mean he becomes some type of all-SEC, all-American guy, I don't know if that's going to happen. I just think that it's time to expect some things out of Owen Papo because he's not been able to really produce, given his health issues, since I believe his freshman season. So that's number 2 on this list. Let's go ahead and head to number 3. Killian Zaire, offensive tackle for the Auburn Tigers this spring. For the Auburn Tigers. And this is what Zach notes about Zaire this spring. He might have already won the starting left tackle job. Zach notes he has elite size and a frame that could allow the NFL to take a look at his play this season. Now, I know a lot of people are going to immediately jump to, it's like, well, in the back of my mind, Auburn's not necessarily the best team in the country when it comes to putting out offensive linemen, at least not over the past couple of seasons, given the way that Auburn's recruited. They're not in the position to really put out a bunch of draft-eligible tackles that could actually be taken. Of course, I think that Zach makes a fair point here. Zaire may be a little bit of an exception, given his size. He's listed at 6'7", 312 pounds. That's a massive frame. Zach notes that it measures out well when looking at some of the top offensive tackles in this year's NFL draft. So take a look with me at the top 5 tackles in this year's draft. You've got Evan Neal, who is 6'7", 360 pounds. Charles Cross from Mississippi State is 6'5", 300 pounds. Trevor Penning is 6'7", 321. Darian Kennard is 6'5", 335 pounds. I mean, all of the 345, excuse me. All of these guys have really powerful size and frames. And Zach notes, frame I think is going to be valuable in the NFL. And if Zaire gains a few more pounds this offseason as he prepares for the fall, he could be primed to take a step forward against 6'7", 312-pound left tackle. This has been a guy that I believe we've been waiting on to really blossom into a bigger role. If I'm not mistaken, injury has held back Zaire a little bit of his during a little bit of his time here with the Tigers. And so if he's healthy this season, he may be the guy to slot in at that left tackle spot. And I'll just say this. Auburn's been looking for an answer on the offensive line. They've been looking for multiple people to step up, quite frankly, but they've been looking for somebody at the tackles. And I think that Zaire, not only is he capable of stepping up, but I think that he's needed. I think that he needs to step up.
And so while part of this article is breaking down, these are guys that could break out, saying like you don't necessarily think they're going to, but they might. This is one of those, I feel like Auburn needs somebody to step up at left tackle, and it would make sense if it was Killian Zaire. He's somebody that I think needs to be able to perform for the Tigers this season. And that offensive line as a whole needs to be able to perform. I mean, you've got 3 years now into Tank Bigsby's tenure, and we've talked about this a little bit before on the show, just asking, like, will we look back on Tank Bigsby's career and say that it was kind of an unknown, it was a what-if scenario because Auburn's offensive line was not doing him any favors and it wasn't letting that talent consistently be shown to the world? Auburn's got to do a much better job of run blocking this season if their offense is going to do what Brian Harsin says it's going to do, which is be a controlling offense that approaches the game from a physical standpoint and just says, we're going to push you around a little bit. We're going to run the ball. We're going to control the clock. We're going to control the tempo. We're going to be downhill, so to speak. They've got to be able to get contribution from guys like Killian Zaire. They've got to be able to get some guys to step up on the offensive line. So that's the third player here in potential breakout candidates. Let's move to number 4, Eku Leota. It's the absolute unit himself. I don't know why I couldn't remember the nickname that Zach had given him. This is what Zach says about Leota in his article over at Auburn Daily. Leota's numbers in 2021 in a reserve role allowed him to register 10 tackles for a loss and 7 sacks. Most folks who know the program are expecting those numbers to trend up this season. His weight gain and his first full offseason at Auburn have set him up to succeed this season. I agree. The fact that Eku Leota was able to do what he did in, like Zach mentioned, a reserve role was very impressive. I did not expect a lot out of Eku Leota heading into this year, at least not initially. And my initial comp was like, well, I don't know why I did this during the offseason. Like, well, we've seen guys like TJ Neal transfer into the program, and they've not been able to do much. But I think that Eku Leota is a different scenario. He's a different type of player. I think he's a better athlete. And we got to see him produce. We got to see Leota produce this past season. And this is an interesting note. Zach put this out on Twitter earlier. It's the stat of the day here. Eku Leota rushed the passer on 93.6% of his snaps last season. According to Pro Football Focus, Leota won in pass rushing downs 27% of the time. He tallied 6 sacks, 3 quarterback hits, and 14 hurries in 2021. And then Zach asked, do you expect those numbers to go up in 2022? And I'm going to say probably, and I think Zach said the same thing. I'm going to say probably they go up. You have to look at all the different names on Auburn's defensive line this year. You have to look at guys like Marcus Harris, Colby Wooden, Derek Hall, Jason Jones. And there's a lot of different guys that are going to be problems for opposing teams. And if Auburn on the defensive line is taking the approach, and I think that they don't necessarily have a choice because it's their personnel, but if they're going to take the stance, the approach that, okay, we don't necessarily have a star player, we've just got a bunch of really solid guys up front, that makes it really difficult as an opponent to say, okay, who do we double team? Who do we attack more in this situation? Like, who consistently do we go after more than other guys to make sure it's like, okay, if there's one guy we don't want getting after our quarterback, it's this guy. Let's focus in on him. If you got 3 or 4 guys, it's like, okay, they're problems in their own right. It makes it really difficult to kind of focus in, and it allows guys like Eku Leota, who are now going to come into a starting role, to really thrive. It's like, okay, well, we've got Derek Hall over here. We've got Marcus Harris over here. We've got Jason Jones up front, who is just a massive human being at nose tackle. They're all causing problems. Colby Wooden as well. It's like, who do we not block? And if Eku Leota is consistently that guy, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to step up and make plays in the backfield this year. Now, whether or not he does that, I mean, you can predict what you want about Eku Leota. I think that's the question here. But I believe he's going to have the opportunity to do so, especially in a starting role. Gregory Lawrence, in the chat. What's up, Lance? War Eagle to you as well, Gregory. Hope you're doing all right. Taking a look at 5 Auburn Tigers that could take a big step this season. We've already gone through 4 of them. Eku Leota, Killian Zaire, Owen Papo, and then Malcolm Johnson Jr. If anybody out there watching has thoughts on who they think could step up and break out this season, you can leave it in the YouTube comments here below. Or if you're watching on another platform, leave it in the chat. You can also do this post-stream as well. So let's go ahead and get to our final guy here on the list. And again, this is Zach Blackerby's list, not mine. You can go read it over at auburndaily.com. Marquise Gilbert is the last guy here. Actually, before we get into him, I want to know what Gregory just said. Zykevious Walker has a wide open opportunity to step up on on account of all those you just mentioned. And that's a really good point. And I believe actually Zach said something similar on his podcast earlier. It's like, we're not talking enough about Zykevious Walker. It's just a guy that you don't really tend to mention a lot. And so if you apply the logic that I was using there, it's like, well, Auburn's got all these different guys that are not necessarily stars, but they're really, really talented individually. If they've got all these different guys that the opposing offensive line has to account for, there's going to be one guy that's kind of left somewhat unattended. If that's Eka Leota, he's going to rack up numbers. But if it's Zykevious Walker, who could legitimately break out as well, I think he's got the opportunity to eat this season. I think Zykevious Walker is another really, really good answer. The defensive line is something that I'm really excited about this season, because last year it felt like at times what held Auburn back and allowed opponents to kind of dissect their defense, Penn State, Mississippi State, enough said, it was the lack of, not necessarily, I think Auburn's pass rush was decent last season. It's just they couldn't, it was the consistency at some points for me. It's like they couldn't get home in short to intermediate passing situations where the opponent was trying to get the ball out quick. Auburn could apply no pressure or disrupt the quarterback's rhythm or timing whatsoever, especially at Penn State and Mississippi State is what I mean. So if you've got all these new guys in, these transfer portal guys, and a couple of freshmen as well, I believe Auburn picked up 3 defensive linemen in this class, including Jason Jones, the transfer. You've got all these guys on your roster who are extremely talented, and you've got some of these guys that have developed, Eka Leota being one of them. There's an opportunity for this unit to be really, really, really good. And whenever I say that, I mean like top 3 in the SEC kind of good. I'm not saying like, oh, it's the best in the country, but it's got the chance to be something special. I'm excited about guys like Walker. I'm excited about guys like Leota. I keep saying Jason Jones. Marquise Burks is another guy that we haven't talked about yet. He could be somebody that steps up playing at nose tackle. Probably going to share time with Jason Jones unless Jones just takes that spot away from him, which I don't know if that's going to happen yet. Going to have to see more before the fall gets here. Or excuse me, before the first game gets here. Going to have to see more in fall camp. But anyway, the final guy here, Marquise Gilbert, playing at safety, junior college prospect, #1 JUCO safety in the country, signed with the Tigers this offseason, is what Zach says about him in his article. Says the junior college safety looked great in the 8A scrimmage and should have probably walked away from the annual showcase with an interception off of TJ Finley. Gilbert's size and approach to the game make him an instant impact type of candidate, and I agree. Auburn definitely needs a little bit of help at safety now that Smoke Monday is gone. Of course, I know a lot of people have mixed feelings on Smoke Monday and whether or not he was a legitimate player for the Tigers, like consistent. But we won't dive into that today. Marquise Gilbert, though, you do like his size at 6'2", 185. You got to love that. Really, really like it whenever my cornerbacks and my safeties and my defensive backs as a whole have a little bit of height. I like that. That's just a personal preference thing for me. It's not to say like guys like Donovan Kaufman aren't good. I think they're very talented within their own right, all due respect. But you gotta like the size for Marquise Gilbert. And had he been able to pick off that pass from TJ Finley, I think people would be talking about him a little bit more. He's somebody that could step up for the Tigers this season. And then there was one more guy that was not included in Zach's article, but I wanted to talk about him because I discussed him in another article over at auburndaily.com. It's Colby Wooden. And Colby Wooden is somebody that had a relatively solid season for the Tigers. He's been a pretty solid player. But if we're talking here about players that could break out and just go crazy, just go stupid with their numbers or their production in film, you just watch like that guy's consistently, while he may not be racking up sacks, he's getting there pressures wise. If We're going to talk about somebody that could potentially break out. Brad Crawford of 24/7 Sports recently released a list of 22 players to watch ahead of the 2022 season. And Colby Wooden, junior defensive end at Auburn, made the list at number 20. And this is what Brad Crawford had to say about Colby Wooden. Said at 6'5" and nearly 280 pounds, Wooden has been a consistent presence in the middle of the Auburn defense over the past 2 seasons as a starter, compiling 107 total tackles in 24 games with 9 sacks and 18.5 tackles for loss. Very solid numbers there. His 2022 campaign should be the best of his career and put him in the upper tier of the conference up front. And then I also noted in the article, outside of what Crawford had to say, Wooden totaled career highs in games played. He played every single game for the Tigers this past season. Career high in tackles. I believe he had 61 total, but it was tackles in both solo and assisted. And then he had a career high total of sacks during the 2021 season. And while he was slightly overshadowed by Derek Hall on the edge, Wooden has also found success on the inside of the defensive line. He's the most versatile piece, in my opinion, that Auburn has up front. And for a guy that was on the edge to rack up 61 tackles it would indicate like, well, Auburn likes to use him in a lot of different areas. He's got nice size too at 6'4". The Tigers have a fair amount of depth in the trenches after picking up 3 defensive linemen during this year's cycle. This is something that I note in the article as well. There are going to be plenty of mouths to feed, as we have gone over already. But Wooden should be at the top of whatever depth chart Auburn releases this fall. I would expect him to be a major all-SEC type of contributor for the Tigers. Now, will he be all-SEC? I don't know, but I think the opportunity is there for him to become that type of guy. Colby Wooden is somebody that I'm expecting a lot out of. And I mean, man, let's go through the names here one more time really quick. You've got Colby Wooden, Derek Hall, Marcus Harris, Eka Leota, Jason Jones, Marquise Burks, Zykevius Walker. You've got a lot of different guys in this room that have already either been really impressive during their time with the Tigers or are beginning to grow. And you can kind of see that potential in them. And you can kind of see that breakout potential in these individual players. This D-line, I think, is going to be special this year, man. I would expect that it does well. And if it doesn't, and I don't want to say this definitively because again, it's early and I also don't know what's going on in practice every single day. But just looking at some of the names and some of the production that this unit already has and what it could do, I would be leaning a little bit on the coaching staff if this unit was not able to produce this season. And I don't necessarily know how to define the production or the expectation. I just think it should be good. I don't want to come to the end of the season and I don't want to look at Auburn in the bottom third of tackles for loss, sacks, pressures. I don't want to see them in the bottom third of the nation. I don't want to see them sitting at like 90th to 100 in those categories. I want to see them be impressive in those areas. I want this defensive line to be a factor. I want it to be something that people fear. Whenever they talk about Auburn, it's like, okay, we're playing Auburn this weekend. Well, their defensive line is definitely going to be a problem. I think that's one of the first things that needs to come to mind for opponents this year. We've got too many guys on roster to fail at that spot. At least that's the way I perceive it. And I don't want to be too definitive again because I may just be wrong on that, but I don't think I am. Of course, it's my opinion. Of course, I'm going to think I'm right. Anyway, so those are 5 players that could potentially break out for the Tigers in 2022. And then on top of that, wanted to talk about Colby Wooden a little bit. Also, in case you just want to know who some of the other rising stars, according to Brad Crawford. Let's work our way from the top here and go to the go back to Colby Wooden. I'll just hit some of these interesting names because I personally, while this is an Auburn show, I'm just going to briefly look at some of the guys here. Dallas Turner off the edge for Alabama is the number 1 player. Nate Wiggins, a cornerback at Clemson, it's at number 2. Logan Diggs, a running back at Notre Dame. I'm assuming he's taking over the starting role if they have him that high. Byron Young, an edge at Tennessee. Let's see, is there anybody else interesting in here? Somebody that Auburn could be. Keatron Jackson, who will be getting significant playing time with the Hogs this season. The Razorbacks, Auburn's going to have to play against him this season. Let's see. Gary Bryant Jr., wide receiver at USC. They're always pumping out good wide receivers. Josh Downs, a receiver at North Carolina. What do they look like without Sam Howell at the helm? Zach Evans, who is, if we're talking about just interconference things here, if we're talking about Auburn being a really good defensive line and opponents saying, okay, well, we have to prepare for that. Ole Miss has a running back in Zach Evans, former 5-star, transferred in from TCU. He's going to be a problem this season. And then they also got another kid from SMU, I believe, is the school. Got another running back from SMU that was really, really good. So that Ole Miss backfield, I think they're going to have people are going to have to fear Auburn's defensive line this season. There are a lot of breakout stars, potential breakout stars that are going to have to face that this year. Interested to see what that looks like. All right, there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about today. And we'll probably discuss it more in depth later on down the line because it's the off season. We got plenty of time to talk about whatever we want to, and we may touch on topics more than once. But I wanted to take a look at Auburn's 2022 schedule, and not in the light of saying for the millionth time that the first 5 games are exciting. But instead, I wanted to ask the question because I believe there was an article actually released by 24/7 Sports. Might have been Brad Crawford again. On a hot streak, Crawford, let's go. But he put out an article of like every SEC team's trap game this upcoming season. And if I'm not mistaken, he had Missouri as Auburn's potential trap game this year. And to be honest with you, you look at the rest of the schedule, and I don't think there's really a lot of room for trap games because you get Mercer and San Jose State. And those are going to be wins, but I don't think there's trap potential in them. San Jose State's not a great team. Mercer's an FCS school. So I don't think that you could peg that as a trap game. Penn State's going to be a 50-50 matchup. People acknowledge that it's going to be a tough game. Missouri's kind of sandwiched in between Penn State and LSU. And I've had a similar opinion on this show, just saying like, look, that should be a winnable game for the Tigers. Like whenever I've done the schedule breakdown, I'm like, okay, so we win against Mercer, we win against San Jose State, we have a chance to beat Penn State, we're probably going to beat Missouri, and then we have a tough game against LSU. We kind of scrape by Missouri. It's just like tough game, another tough game, then we go play Georgia and get our butts handed to us. That's a joke, but it's probably reality, unfortunately. But yeah, Missouri is an interesting team. If I'm not mistaken, they just picked up Jaden Daniels, who is a transfer from Arizona State. His first season in college, I believe he had a 17-1 TD to INT ratio. Very, very efficient quarterback. And then his next season, why don't we just go ahead and pull up Jaden Daniels' numbers because I can. But we're talking about Arizona State quarterbacks in Missouri, but hear me out here for a second. All right, so Jaden Daniels, during this past season, let's just look at his stats. Yeah, so this past season, gosh, why don't we pull up? Come on now. He had 10 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, which just kind of shows you the fall from grace for Daniels. In 2020, he had 5 touchdowns to 1 interception. And then in 2019, like I said, 17 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, excuse me. With a 62.3% completion percentage. I don't know what Daniels is going to look like in this Missouri offense, but it's worth noting that Auburn in this trap game, hypothetical, if we're going to call it a trap game, let's assume it is for the sake of argument. They're going to have to go up against an up-and-coming coach in Eli Drinkwitz, and you can debate whether or not he is. I'm just labeling him as such right now. They've got a pretty decent wide receiver core, if I'm being honest. They got Luther Burden, 5-star freshman. They've also got Mookie Cooper, transfer from Ohio State. I'm having a stroke. I don't know what their running back situation looks like because Larry Roundtree is gone. I'm curious to see how they replace that there. But their passing offense should be legitimate. We've talked about Auburn's inabilities to rush the passer. What if those are an issue early in the season? What if Missouri's offensive line is able to pick up some blitzes and Jaden Daniels is able to kind of do what he wants, given the fact that he's been an efficient quarterback in college before? That is a potential trap game. And Missouri's defense, I'm going to be honest with you, if we're trying to peg this as a trap game, the Missouri's defense does them no help whatsoever. They were one of the worst rush defenses in the entire country last season. And so if we're making the claim that Auburn's defense could struggle like it did in 2021 against Missouri, I think it's fair to make the assumptions like, well, if we're going to say that, then why don't we also say Missouri's defense is going to struggle against Auburn's offense and their philosophy. While Auburn may not be the best run blocking team in the entire country, they probably could establish a ground game against Missouri with Tank Bigsby, given the fact that it's at home. I think it's a very winnable game. And I don't think that Brian Harsin is the type of guy to just kind of overlook things or overlook a game. You may say, well, how do we know that for sure? Well, we don't necessarily know it for sure because he's only been here only been at Auburn a year. But I mean, when your entire messaging your first season was be 1-0, let's not talk about what's happening down the road. Let's just talk about what's going on right now. I don't think that he's gonna head into this Saturday or September slate and be like, all right, boys, we are looking really, really sweet. We're just gonna coast and we're gonna try and prepare for LSU and Georgia. All right, roll tide, roll tide. I think he's gonna be able to say, let's try and get better week 1 against Mercer. Let's look at all the different things that we want to do. Let's apply it in this game against Mercer. If things don't work out, let's try and adjust, or let's maybe say, well, maybe that may work out against a future opponent. Let's keep trying that. Then you'll head into San Jose State, a little bit more difficult of an opponent. Like, okay, let's continue to work on our quarterback play. Let's continue to work on our timing with the receivers. Let's work on that run blocking. Let's work on that secondary, kind of generating a pass rush, doing the right things technique-wise to get prepared for Penn State, but they're not looking down the road, right? So they're adjusting this week. And so we get into the Penn State week. It's like, okay, here's our first legitimate opponent. Let's try and take this step by step and apply our game plan to the best of our ability. Let's not think about what's coming up. Let's not think about the SEC schedule that's coming up. And then he gets to Missouri. It's like, it's our first SEC game. This is an opportunity to go out there. And this is the way I would approach it. This is our opportunity to go out there and make a statement to show everybody that we can legitimately compete and that Auburn's not going 5-7 like Vegas thinks. Let's go out here and let's prove a point. And let's understand while these guys are good in certain areas, we're not going to overlook that. We're not going to look ahead to LSU. I think that's the type of approach that Brian Harsin is going to take. So Missouri, while it may be the most logical trap game on the schedule, I don't think Auburn's necessarily going to overlook it. And who knows? It's always fun to kind of speculate on trap games. And you may say, well, while Auburn's not going to overlook it, the national media narrative will still portray that post-game against Missouri. It's like, oh, well, that was still a trap game, or that was a trap game based on what the national narrative was heading into it. But if you're here in Auburn and you're paying attention to what the coach is saying, I think we could come out of that game and say, well, this was not overlooked. But the national media may say otherwise. Other games I think worthy of note would be Arkansas and Western Kentucky. To be quite honest with you, other than that, I don't really know if there's a trap game on the schedule. Auburn's not going to be favored in quite a few contests this season, unless they start off 5-0, 6-1. But I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Arkansas and Western Kentucky. If this was Western Kentucky last season, that would be my answer to this question. Is that, yeah, Western Kentucky would be a problem for the Tigers. But that's all I had today. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. And before you head out, got a note here for you. Something interesting I think you guys should take a look at. We've got a sponsor for the show, and I'm really excited about it because we've been looking for a sponsor. We just started off. We've got Auburn shirts, AU shirts. There's a new place to visit to help you flex your fandom, and it's AU shirts. AUshirts.com is the one-stop shop for Auburn fans being able to display their Auburn sports fandom for every major sport here on the planes. They've got a lot of different really, really cool designs. And the newest shirt at aushirts.com is the first official shirt from Auburn first baseman Sonny DeShera. Most of you know him affectionately as the Thick King. He's got a really, really dope design that says Thick King on it. You guys should definitely go check it out, aushirts.com. You can also find shirts ranging from the Everything School design to celebrating the Cruton Finger, portal season, and other official player designs that will all be coming soon. And AU Shirts is giving Auburn Daily viewers 10% off their order. And all you have to do is use promo code DAILY at checkout. And that's DAILY. That's daily at checkout for 10% off your order. And that's over at AUshirts.com. They've got some really good designs. I've actually got one. I should have worn it for the show. They got a really, really dope design that says support the troops, run the triple option. Absolutely love that shirt. Really, really cool designs over at AUshirts.com. Again, use promo code DAILY at checkout for 10% off. There you go. Check them out. All right, guys. That's going to do it for today's Auburn Daily Show. Again, said at the beginning, say it again. If you are not following us on the socials already, SI_Auburn on Twitter. And then also, you can follow us at Auburn Daily over on Facebook. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of the Auburn Daily Show. Hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, and God bless.